Okay, so before I go into this next section, I thought I would just kind of show you how the debate is still alive and well on socialism and communism. Despite the fact that the Soviet Union has fallen, despite the fact that China's complicated right now. Well, maybe we'll go into this later. China is officially a communist country, but it's the Communist Party making China one of the largest, fastest growing capitalist countries in the world. Again, I've talked about how labels change, and to call China communist is not reality, but it still is ran by the Communist Party. Things have changed in China since the 70s. And so don't let the names fool you. It's a little more complicated, okay? But other than that, even Bill Clinton was accused of being a socialist. The Democrats are often accused of that by the Republicans. Fox News, again, as I've mentioned, some of you may watch it regularly, some of you may not. In any case, I thought this was a great clip to kind of show the way that some modern discourse takes place. And then I'm going to go back and return to the topic and explain some things. And I'll tell you where my thoughts on this a little bit. Okay.
His childhood, teenage years, and adult childhood spent with radicals, Marxist and communist, and then attending a Marxist church for 20 years with a Marxist pastor. What has he done lately? Well, there is the tiny matter of him taking over the auto industry. No big deal. GM is just been taken over 61%. And then, of course, the nagging little detail of that the government now controls much of America's banking industry. We have that. And then, of course, there's AIG Insurance, the insurance giant that we also took those over. Those are fantastic. And yes, he has taken the first step towards socialization, total government control of our healthcare system. I had an appointment with my doctor today, and he was thrilled about that. And, controlling the entire healthcare industry. It's only 1/6. Don't worry about that. Oh, he's also seized control of the entire student loan industry. Just wipe that industry out. Far from celebrating capitalists and capitalism, he has repeatedly demonized the wealthy, dating back to his early days of his campaign. Here's how Obama responded when he was asked about raising the capital gains tax at the expense of the economy. Watch.
Okay. So I thought that gave a perfect illustration as to some of what you hear come out of, I guess you'd call the right-wing discourse on Obama. And I will kind of address some of the things that are said in there as I explain socialism and communism here. Okay, so first of all, let's make clear that Karl Marx died never seeing what his ideas would look like in action. The communist revolution of Russia and China, he was long dead. Okay, you see he died 1883. Okay, the first communist revolution that's going to happen in Russia is going to be as a result of World War I. So he is responding to what he sees as a result of capitalism and industrialization. He doesn't have to explain for himself Stalin, right? He doesn't have to explain even Lenin. He doesn't have to explain how many people died, or he doesn't have to be held responsible to that, in the sense that we don't even know what he would actually have thought about those revolutions. He was kind of a grumpy old guy, so he probably just would have complained about anything done in his name, which he did in his lifetime. He didn't have a lot of friends except for Engels, too. But in any case, all right, so let's talk about socialism. The demand for equality. So there was different types of socialism. The textbook says socialism is defined as an ideology calling for the ownership of the means of production by the community with the purpose of reducing inequalities of income, wealth, opportunity, and economic power. It mentions it on a small level. It would be collectively through the community, or if it's a large city or state, you'd give ownership of property to the state, which represents the people. So socialists have always demanded, or argued, should I say, with themselves about, if workers take over industry and they control it, or the state takes it over, are those the same thing or they're different? For anarchists, which we will talk about later, the state controlling something is no better than a corporation. They want direct worker control of industry. In other words, where the workers are collectively controlling, let's say Costco is being ran by everyone. There's no CEO, and there is a bargaining, and everybody is hypothetically equal on some point, and there is this kind of collective unity working together, and that the profits are going kind of collectively to everybody. Okay, all right. And then there's the idea of institutions that would be ran by the state. Now, Robert Owen was kind of, considered an example of a utopian socialist that tried to create these kind of communes that, at first he had his own business that he's trying to run in a socialist way. So here was actually, we saw examples of capitalists who were kind of social experimental kind of people, maybe a little eccentric, that want to create a kind of economy in which, in their mind, the inequalities of a capitalism industrialization are removed by doing it in their own way. Okay, and many of these basically ideas failed. And then you had the other ideas of basically going into the state. So let me just clarify. I am instructing you as your college instructor, and I get a paycheck. This is a public institution, a junior college. Then there's the state colleges. There's the UCs. Where does my paycheck come from? Who pays that? My boss? Is it a private boss? No, the taxpayers pay for my boss. Since kindergarten, most of you have been going to socialist institutions. If we're defining socialism as the state owning property and a means of production, jobs, and so on. So public schools of all kind, up to college and university levels, would be socialist. The police department. Who pays when a policeman gets his check? Who's his boss? Is it Donald Trump? No, the taxpayers pay for it. That is a socialist institution that is used to protect private property and rule of law, right? And hypothetically also keep the peace. And so there's different roles that a police officer is supposed to have. That is a socialist institution. What about the military? Military. Who's paying the military? Who's giving them their housing? Where are they getting their medical from? Socialism. What about the fire department? When you call 911, and if you needed a SWAT team, a fire department, and more police to come at your service, what's your bill? Do you get a bill, a service for their service? Do you get a bill? No, those are all socialist institutions you pay with your taxes. Now, what happens when the ambulance comes because you've just, got shot in the leg? What about that? You're going to be paying about $600 from the beginning. I actually owed about $2,000. I went to collections for a 5-minute ambulance ride that I had no control over. Okay, that's the private sector. So in America, when you call 911, you get socialism up until you get the medical attention. And so, in the rest of Europe, the rest of the Western world, medical is provided by the state. In Britain and so forth, even Canada And I just talked with a Canadian girl, and she said conservatives in Canada consider having socialized medicine a conservative value because they just think that everybody should be covered. And I've saw that time and time again. There's also a lot of complaints about socialized medicine, and there's people that you can find in person or on the radio or on the internet that come from countries that have socialized medicine, and they complain about it and they talk about how much better it would be here. But overwhelmingly, polls show that the Western world that has socialized medicine want to keep it. Even their conservative, fiscally conservative parties don't challenge it for the most part. In any case, the private sector then would be the opposite of socialism, right? Now, what Obama is trying to do is use the government to force the insurance industry to set rates and to change policies on behalf of what he thinks that the state should intervene in. So Obama is definitely advocating state intervention into the private sector, but he's not abolishing it. He's not creating socialized medicine. I would argue, not from a political bias, it is categorically false, based on the definitions we're talking about, to define Obamacare as socialist. Is it a good thing? That's debatable. Is socialism a good thing? That's debatable. Is Obamacare socialism? Not in any classical sense. It's the state intervening in the economy. Yes. It's a different animal, I would argue. It's not socialized medicine. Is he trying to take us there? Well, that's another question. But that's an example of, I think, where things are a little distorted. And my question I always ask is, why is everybody comfortable, are the majority of all of the socialist institutions that we have for emergency care, like police, fire department, and SWAT teams and all of that, and not the medical? Why do all of a sudden we're going to look like North Korea if we switch over to medicine, being socialist when we call 911? But again, this is a great debate to have. It'd just be great if the debate was more educated and people were able to actually understand what we're talking about, so that we could actually have a more healthy debate about this. And even when I've watched the news and Obama care was being addressed as socialist on the Democratic show, on CNN and whatever, almost none of them talked about the examples of Europe and where they got it wrong and where they got it right. They're not even using that as a discussion. Because from this time forward, European countries are going to embrace openly much of socialist ideas. But having said that, then we go to communists. Communists call themselves socialist. Karl Marx was talking about socialism, and if you notice in that video, Obama was being called a socialist and a communist. Well, what's the difference? This is very confusing. It's complicated, and I'm going to explain that next, what communism is, especially under Karl Marx ideas, and the difference from defining something as just simply socialist and then a communist defining themselves as socialist. So, all right, in next lecture.